Hello, wonderful. This is Sarah. And have you ever thought that maybe marriage or long term relationships are experiencing any problems? My guess is you have. And we have Tim Kellis here, who is known as the man who has solved the marriage problem or long term relation problem. How are you, Tim?
Sarah, I am doing wonderful. Let me begin by seriously and sincerely thanking you for the opportunity to come on your podcast and talk about what I consider a very significant problem in our culture today. And yes, I actually have figured it out, have figured out how to teach couples how to stay together for life. And that my passion about doing this is so that I can lower the divorce rate. That is my ultimate goal.
Let's get right into it. I thank you for coming, and I am obviously quite obsessed with this subject and how to get more people in better relationships. So tell people what is the main problem in relationships that you see?
If we were to canvass unsuccessful relationships, there's one characteristic and only one characteristic that is predominant in almost all of them, and that is control. Mm-hmm. Okay, when I say I've solved the marriage problem, the solution is equality. It's a partnership. And you and I kind of talked about before we got started, but if you're in a good marriage, and you're in a good marriage, that means you and your husband are partners, you have an equal say. Not only that, the really cool concept when you understand what it means to have a partnership, what it means is you have your skill sets and he has his skill sets, and you guys can rely on each other. One of the mistakes that people make is they want their partner to be just like them. If you and I were to start a business and we're both salespeople, so you and I are both expert salespeople, is our business going to survive? Probably not. Because who's going to do the accountant or the manufacturing or the, who's going to do a partnership is when two people are different and not the same person. But when you get into the problem is control. And when you think about it historically, this is where it really makes sense. Before the 60s, our marriages were patriarchal. I was in charge. Okay, and you were subordinate to me. I was responsible for the finances, I was responsible for logic, and I was responsible for the control of the relationship. You, on the other hand, before the 60s, was responsible for the emotional side of the relationship. You were responsible for raising the children and the nurturing environment of the home. In 1970, less than 1% of all law and medical degrees went to women. By 1990, that number was over half. There is no questioning in our conversation the education of women. So what women did, quite literally for the first time, by the way, in the history of human civilization, was they were able to go and get jobs. So if your husband wants to be a jerk to you, you can say, sorry, honey, I can go on my own. I don't need your money. And that's where divorces come from. So we have not yet figured out how to, this is all we're going through is a transition, by the way. And when people understand it's simply a transition from the man being in charge to nobody being in charge, it really reduces the anxiety, for one, of a relationship. But people need to understand how to create what you and your husband have. And you guys, your smile before we talked about this was awesome. You guys have, by the way, have discovered the mountaintop. The mountaintop is romantic love, and you guys have that. And I don't even need to ask you because I know that you guys have that the good stuff in the relationship.
So Tim asked me about my marriage right before, we hit go. So if anybody's listening to the podcast, they can't see my smile, but I think that type of thing really is hard to fake. Like when you asked me about my husband and this huge grin comes on my face and I was like, oh, I think I said we were disgustingly happy. We had a family thing this week and we've had so many transitions. I think it's sad to me when I say how happy my marriage is. We've been married for 3 years, together for 6. They say, oh, well, you just hadn't been together that long, or you hadn't been through enough problems, you hadn't been through enough things. And the job changes, the building of the house, the raising of the teenager, the health problems, I told you my stepson was in a car wreck, very bad car wreck, legal things that have happened. I mean, we've had so many things happen in this 6 years. So I find it sad to say, well, people are only happily married if they haven't had any problems. That just breaks my heart.
What you learn and what you guys do, and this is the key difference, is what you learn is to take on the world instead of taking on each other.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you just described. As opposed to most relationships that are not successful, they spend all their time taking on each other. And they lose sight of the bigger picture. It's more important to be right than the problem solve. Just so you know, Sarah, and I can talk about this as long as you want, but I have created one of the largest marriage groups on Facebook.
Oh, that's wonderful.
In fact, today we just went over 21,000 members.
Oh, congratulations.
Okay? In fact, just so you know, some of the most interesting and humorous comments I get, people will go into my group and their response will be, I'm glad I came to the group. I realized my marriage problems aren't so bad.
And I have some friends in that situation for sure. Mm-hmm.
Well, what I'm saying is when you go to the group, it's my spouse cheated on me, haven't had sex in 2 years. It's a really great cross section of understanding unsuccessful relationships, because these are people that are trying to figure it out, and that's what attracts them to my group. So in fact, I get about 70 posts a day. I average about 2,000 posts a month, and I'm growing, by the way, by about 2,000 new members a month. So this group is really exploding, but it really gives you a sense of the culture of our relationships today. And it's these people are, it's so sad to see the struggles that these guys are going through, just trying to figure out how to get along with each other. And that's what I basically teach people how to do.
Well, and if they had a parent or grandparent dynamic that was very patriarchal, and one person was obviously in charge, and I have many relationships in my life that I see a female being in charge of her husband. It's always appropriate to make fun of him. It's always like belittle him. You see that on TV, like Everybody Loves Raymond or something, where it's just like socially appropriate to belittle your husband. I hate those dynamics as much as I hate angry and controlling men belittling their wives.
Well, let me elaborate on that comment. Okay. The biggest hole in our society today, when it comes to marriage, the biggest problem that we have in our marriages today is emotional men. Women are logical. In fact, women, you and I we're not having a conversation about how logical you can be, but it's still considered a weakness for men to show emotions. And so it's not 100% the case, but a large percent of the problem is the man shutting down. One of the biggest pieces of advice that I could give to your audience is, if a man opens up emotionally, you better pray God that you respond in a positive manner, because he is sticking his toe in the water when he's giving you some emotional conversation. And if you use that against him, it's the last time that guy will ever open up to you. And so the point is, the only statistical anomaly that I've been able to discover in all of my research, and I spent 2 years researching and writing this book. I read 100 books as part of my research over a 10-month period. I read 2.5 books a week, nonstop, for 10 months. Okay. And so the only statistical anomaly that I've been able to discover is that 2/3 of divorces are filed by women. Finish this phrase: happy wife, happy
life. Yes.
Where's the man in that?
Yeah.
In fact, it's supposed to be happy spouse, happy house, but we have basically, women are now in control of relationships. And what they do is they control relationships emotionally. It's a lot harder to control relationships logically. So, all right, Sarah, you have to ask me anytime you want to spend money. Hang on a second, Francis. What do you mean I have to get your permission for finances, right? But a woman can use her emotional skills to control the relationship. And that's what you see happening and what you've described with your experiences.
I hate it. I love healthy power dynamics in relationships. I don't care if it's the guy or the girl. I don't care who's in charge. I hate it. I love equality in relationships. And I use the phrase at the top of the pyramid. So in my family structure, we talk about who's always at the top of the pyramid. And I grew up very much in a house where my father was always at the top of the pyramid. My parents do have a good relationship, but they played roles that were very more, 1950s than most people grew up in my age. And so, but we talk about the turn at the top of the pyramid, and it's even with the kids, because I see some families where the kid is always at the top of the pyramid, and then it's creating a dysfunctional family dynamic because everybody's running around, little Johnny's 8-year-old temper tantrums, and it's like, whoa, Johnny's not supposed to be in charge, but I think a healthy relationship, obviously me and my husband take a turn at the top of the pyramid, but my daughter had a athletic event this weekend.
The kids are slightly below in priority, very slightly, but the kids are below in priority, absolutely.
Yes, and it was so funny. So we were at my daughter's athletic event this weekend, and the kids were fighting over who got to sit beside me. They're like, I want to sit by Mom, because they just like having a reason to fuss at each other. And my husband's like, no, I'm sitting by your mother.
But let me bring up one point, because you actually just brought up earlier one point that is the most significant thing to understand about a relationship. Okay, and this, what I'm about to describe to you, have you ever heard of Carl Jung?
Yes.
Okay, so for anybody that is in the audience, let me explain who Carl Jung is. Carl Jung was 19 years younger than Freud. Freud looked up to Jung so much that he not only considered him his heir apparent, but he also considered him his son. And let me just say that they had their famous breakup in 1912, and Jung went much further than Freud did in figuring out how the mind works. That's when you study Jung, that's what you realize. And what's so interesting about their relationship, even though they broke up, Freud died in 39. And Jung still respected Freud, and in fact, he referred to Freud in his obituary, or the way he described Freud, as his work was epic making. But what he said was that Freud introduced psychology into psychiatry. This is what Freud did. But what Freud didn't do is Freud didn't introduce psychology into psychology. What Freud did was Freud introduced biology into psychology. And when you understand that the foundation of the psychology industry is still the biology theory, this is why you get behavioral advice. If you ever do any research on any professional, they give you behavioral advice, like the 5 love languages, behavioral advice. And that's because in their belief, we are nothing more than animals incapable of thinking. So they think they can tell us what to do by giving us behavioral advice. That is literally the foundation of all the industry. There is no psychology in psychology. And so what I'm about to explain to you is going to do that for the first time. What I'm about to explain to you, you will find in no work written by professional therapists. In fact, one of the things you realize is there's no professional therapist that has written a relationship book with a psychological component. And so let me explain this. I'm setting you up for this. The only reason why I can confidently and comfortably tell anybody that I have solved the marriage problem is because I forgave my parents when I was 25 years old. That turns out to be, number one, it turns out we're supposed to be born twice. The first is obvious, but the second is when we're born into adulthood. And you're not born, you do not birth into adulthood until you let go of those childhood strings, mainly from your parents. Because what do you just explain, for example, you could have grown into an adult with the belief of what your parents taught you, that you're the nice little housewife. You're going to sit at home and you're going to let your husband tell you what to do. But you grew up as an individual, as Sarah, with your own identity. And with that own identity, you realize, hang on a second, that's the old way of doing things. The new way is I don't need to be subordinate. But if you also learn the flip side of that, that's I don't need to be in charge. In fact, let me tell you this. This is one of the hardest things that I was able to find is a great demonstration of the psychological consequence of when you're the one who's in charge. It's easy to realize that when you're the subordinate one, the psychological damage on that. But it's hard to understand that what the psychological dynamics when you're the one who's in charge. So this actually comes from, have you ever heard of Eddie Vedder?
No.
Pearl Jam.
Oh, yes. Okay, yes.
Okay, Eddie Vedder is the lead singer of Pearl Jam. This is from a solo song of his called Hard Sun. Once I built an ivory tower so I could worship from above. But when I climbed down to be set free, she took me in again. And what he's saying with that phrase is once he created a marriage where he was in charge, he was imprisoning himself. Because think about all the work. Think about if you were trying to control your husband. You know how much effort that you have to put into controlling him? Because here's the point about this. Here's how I summarize this. So Sarah, I'm going to ask you a question. Give me one word, just one, that you would use to describe the concept of equality. Just one word.
Partnership.
Okay. So now let me ask you the question this way. You are a slave. You are in bondage. You are owned as a piece of property by some other human being. You are a slave. What do you think equality means for that person?
Freedom.
Bingo.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When you create a relationship based on equality, you get freedom, and your spouse gets freedom. Sarah gets the freedom to create and to develop into who she's supposed to be, and she's given her husband the freedom to develop into who he's supposed to be. That is equality.
Well, and that's funny because his friends are all like shocked. He does consult with me like, hey, I think I'm going to play golf tomorrow. But it's, hey, I think I'm going to play golf tomorrow. And I say, okay, not can I play golf tomorrow?
Right.
Do I have permission to play golf tomorrow? Sometimes he might say, do you mind if I play golf tomorrow? Something, but it's just, okay, no big deal. But, it's just such a, it's not an energy charged conversation.
In fact, the way I think about this, here's the analogy that I like to use, because you and I have no emotional connection. Say you and I become business partners. Okay. Are you going to come to me and ask me, Tim, you're going to say, Tim, we're going to have a logical, problem-solving conversation. I'm the accountant and you want to buy a $5,000 computer and we can't afford it. We now have a conflict. How do we solve that conflict? You're going to understand it from my perspective, and I'm going to understand it from your perspective. One of the interesting things about these relationships that aren't working is people lose sight of their partner.
Silence their partner.
They lose sight. Lose. Martin Luther King was once asked what he thought was the problem of marriage, and his humble response was, oh, I don't know. I think they don't know each other very well and are afraid. And I love music. You ever heard of Dave Matthews?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Okay, so here's a quote from his song called Angel. It's lonely far from you, even when you're right by me. Yeah. Imagine being in I hear this consistently with couples that I work with. They're in the same room together, worlds apart. Well, you're not getting along. You and your husband are hating each other, and you're not talking to him. He's not talking to you. You're doing your thing. He's doing his thing. You guys lose connection. Or you're mad at him because he's not complying to your subjectivity. Mm-hmm. You come at him and go, well, my mom never did this. Why don't you make up for that instead of forgiving your mom so he can be an objective person and do it the way he's supposed to objectively do it? In fact, one of the issues that I realize, this is we are developing as a culture, and one of the greatest examples, and you're going to love this discussion, men used to not connect with their children. My dad is the oldest boy of 15. Okay. In fact, my dad gave up a football scholarship to play football for Ohio State because he had to stay home to help his parents raise all his siblings. So if you're the mother of 15 kids and one of them dies, it's shocking. It's a devastating experience. But what do you think the father goes through when one of those kids dies? We'll just get another one, right? But today, fathers connect with their children. I bet your husband is a very affectionate father to his kids.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I agree with that too. If one of our listeners is hoping to establish more equality in their relationship, more freedom, more partnership, more good things. What are some steps they can take?
So let me give you the biggest piece of advice on what you're basically asking is dealing with conflicts. I spend basically my whole message is conflict resolution. How do you solve the marriage problem unless you solve the marriage problems? And one of my favorite Carl Jung quotes, the goal is to make conscious what is unconscious, or else it appears as fate. Okay. And so what you're doing, what you have to understand on why there is a conflict. First of all, if it's a disagreement, like you and I are business partners, that's how it's supposed to work. You and your husband can have a disagreement. Well, sweetheart, we got to take the kids to the fair, and you want to play golf. Okay, honey, I won't go to the play golf. That's a disagreement where you both take each other's side into consideration. But we obviously know that's not the way most conflicts are handled in an unsuccessful relationship. You get into anger in arguments. And so what I'm doing here is I'm breaking down the argument into its component parts. It begins with an insecurity. Mom and dad got divorced. Okay. That is a fear now that you are introducing into your own marriage if you're not consciously aware of it. And I'm about to say something that your audience is going to hear for the very first time, because I'm the one who discovered the real causes of our mental problems are prejudices. So that insecurity leads to a prejudice, which is a preconceived opinion. In fact, I call them relationship prejudice. If your parents got divorced and you haven't dealt with that through healing and forgiveness, you're going to bring that fear into your marriage, and now you have a prejudice against marriage. Okay, and the unfortunate reality in marriage is if you are afraid of something happening in your marriage, it will happen. Because that's
it's like, don't think about red cars right now.
Exactly.
Everyone thinks about red cars.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's what you're focusing on, So you say your dad, say personally for you, Sarah, so you can relate this because your dad was probably affectionate with you. Say your dad was not affectionate to you. And now you have this fear that your husband isn't going to be subjectively affectionate with you. So when he comes up and gives you a hug, you'll get mad at him because it's not the way you think he should be giving it to you, because of this fear that's motivating your response to him giving you affection. And so guess what happens to him giving you affection? He's going to quit.
Yep.
One of the most confusing messages that we have gotten from the professionals, which shows you how little they really understand psychologically about relationships, is there's a common notion in our society today that you marry your parent of the opposite sex, right? That is a common thing that people think. That's not true. You don't marry your parent of the opposite sex. You turn your spouse into your parent of the opposite sex. Okay, so the point is I'm explaining the impact of prejudice, which are preconceived opinions that are emotionally based, that are not thought through. In fact, most of these prejudices occur when you're young and you're not developed enough to be able to cognitively handle that. Then you put it upstairs in the unconscious in that undeveloped state, and it sits there waiting to wreak havoc on your relationship. That prejudice is where people become judgmental, which then leads to anger. And so what I'm doing here is I'm connecting the dots between fear and anger. Say you come home late from work and your husband gets mad at you. Damn it, Sarah, you said you're going to be home at 5 and it's 6 o'clock. The normal response is fight or flight, right? You're going to defend yourself, or else you're going to say, screw it, I'm not dealing with this. You're either going to shut down, or you're going to fight them back. And that's how those arguments get to be catastrophic, is when people keep elevating their voices in those arguments. But what you'll discover, if you're being moral, here's the preface of this conversation. You're not out drinking with your buddies. You got that phone call at 5 p.m. You were on the phone for an hour. You didn't think about calling him on the way home, because this is the question that it took me years to figure out. Because, when I was 12 years old, I told my mom I wanted to be a Catholic priest when I was 12 years old. And then I discovered girls. So that career path kind of got derailed. But I was raised with a moral compass. And the question that had always confused me is I didn't really feel like, not that it's right or wrong. That's the problem that people get into. But I didn't feel like I was doing it wrong, but I would still get in trouble for it. And I didn't know how to deal with that. But the point I'm making, Sarah, had nothing to do with you. Your husband got mad at you because of low self-esteem, abandonment issues, mom and dad got divorced, whatever those psychological problems are. So if you could just learn to turn the dialogue back to him. God damn it, Sarah, you're like, so sweetheart, what are you afraid of? That is the question that is going to change the culture of marriage forever. When people learn, what are you afraid of? Because think about this dynamics. You come home late from work and your husband's in that emotional state. He's pissed off. He's been fermenting this anger toward you for an hour. And he's in this emotional state, and you come home and he blows up at you, and you turn around and look at him and ask him, what are you afraid of? Guess what happens in that moment? What you do is you take the dialogue from emotional back to logical, because what he's going to say is, you wake him up. What you do, you shock him. Because what you're doing, what do you mean? What did I? Because you're getting, the Chinese have a saying, and that saying is that history is a mirror. If people were to learn the function of their marriage is for them to see themselves. Mm-hmm. Your husband is allowing you to see who the heck you are. If you realize that it's not him, it's you. What nerve did he strike whenever you get in that emotional state? And that he's a great guy. This is the question that had confused me throughout this process. How do two people fall in love, decide they want to spend the rest of their lives together, to end up not liking each other, to actually hating each other? When you realize how far people take that internal dialogue when they're breaking up with their partner, what is the journey that takes from point A to point B? And that's what I am not only clarifying, but I'm explaining on what to do to keep that from happening.
I loved the breakdown of that too, Tim. This was great. And I know we just hit the tip of the iceberg. So where can people find out more about you and your work and the marriage problem?
Well, the first thing is email me. I do have a free 2-hour seminar. I allow people to sit down. I do recommend highly that you bring your spouse, but I will sit down with two of you. We can do a Zoom call. It's a seminar. It's free. Just email me. My email address is my name, which is Tim. Hopefully people can figure that one out. Kellis, Kellis as in Sam, at happyrelationships.com. Tim Kellis at happyrelationships.com. And the other thing I would highly recommend, the name of my group on Facebook is called The Marriage Support Group. So go to Facebook, search the Marriage Support Group. You'll see a picture of a couple kissing. Feel free to join me in that group. But like I said, one of the things that I do that's unique to my group, I have been kicked out of about 12 different marriage groups because somebody would say I'm having trouble in my relationship, and all I would respond, in fact, it would autofill when I would do this on my phone. Are you interested in learning how to make your marriage work? And that response would get me booted, because what you learn is these groups are founded by the founder for the founder. I have no ego in this game. I cannot lower the divorce rate by myself. So one of the things that I do is I allow other marriage experts to not only contribute, but to join, but also contribute to the group. So I have a lot of other marriage experts. And the criteria, by the way, one of my jobs is to kick out incompetent professionals. And those are people that give behavioral advice. And what I'm doing is if you say, I have a Facebook Live call set up with a guy tomorrow I just met, because he starts discussing the influence of your parents on your marriage. If people understand that, those are people that know what they're doing. People that do not discuss the influence of your parents on your marriage do not know what they're doing and should not be listened to. So you're going to get a group of experts that understand the psychological influence of your parents on your marriage. Not only understand that, but they realize that the only way that they could get you to heal from that is through forgiveness. And so this is what I deal with people, and this is what the experts that I deal with as well. But again, my email address is timkellis at happyrelationships.com.
Tim, thank you for your wisdom. I love the question, what are you afraid of? And we don't fight very much, but I'm sure I'll be able to use it.
This is why it's funny me talking to you. This has nothing. But so what's so interesting about it is well, first of all, and you'll think about this when we're done. Give him a hug. Don't ever take that for granted. You have a gift from God, and don't ever, again, take that for granted. You guys appreciate each other and the fact that you guys, God gave you to each other, and don't ever forget that. Don't ever take that for granted. But you already know that.
We do not take each other for granted at all. We had a pact, and we said we wanted our marriage to be as close to our dating relationship as possible. So, we have this pact, and it's well, I'll tell a little joke on him today, because I've been working out and really focusing on my nutrition and that kind of stuff. And I said, "Are you going to work out today?" He goes, I don't know if I feel like." I said, "Well, I mean, if we're giving up working out as a couple, I mean, I'll be fine with that." He's like, "What? No, I don't want you to keep working out," but it's just that playfulness of just like, not what, why don't you, I've never nagged him to go work out. I mean, I would never nag him to do hardly anything, but it's that playfulness, like, "Oh, okay, well, we don't have to work out anymore."
But all you have done, though, here's the key. All you guys do to have a successful marriage is you're proactive. Most relationships are reactive. Again, you come back to me with this $5,000 computer, and if we're in a relationship, I just jump to, I'm reactionary, I'm angry. What do you mean? And I respond in a negative fashion, as opposed to you and I started ahead of time. Listen, we're gonna talk about it. We're gonna talk about it. One of the biggest pieces of advice that I've heard in doing this is when somebody said what he and his wife agreed to do is they won't yell at each other, and you guys probably do the same thing. You can talk. In fact, Martin Luther King called it civil disobedience. You guys can disagree until the cows come home, as long as you're civil about it. As long as you're civil, it works. It's when you get emotional, because arguments are control mechanisms. That's what when somebody's raising their voice, they are trying to control the outcome. Where there are no distinctions, there can be no superiority. Perfect equality affords no temptation for abuse of control. When you realize the freedom that equality brings, like I said, you and your spouse, that is the holy grail. That is the mountaintop. That is what people are trying to figure out how to get done. And that's what I teach.
Guys, check out Tim Kellis at happyrelationships.com. Right? Tim at happyrelationships.com. Awesome.
Tim Kellis at happyrelationships. Yeah, feel free to email me.
Awesome. Thank you, Tim, for helping us on our journey to becoming toxic person proof.
Sarah, thank you again for the opportunity to share. I can't tell you how much I appreciate the opportunity to come on your podcast and be able to share this. So hopefully
I am grateful for your work. I'm a huge fan of equality in relationships and partnerships. And so this has been perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.